Hello, listeners, and welcome to A Dash of Salt with AJ. I'm your host, Ahsoka Jackson, author, podcaster, poet, and freelance proofreader. Finishing up what I was saying about Gabby last time, in some ways I'm a little surprised that she was actually perceptive enough to even get this. But then again, she is living in the midst of this, and she's both witnessed and experienced how people regard the Eldians as a whole. So it makes sense that she's aware enough to realize that even though Eldians themselves were some of the main casualties in the attack on Liberia, the world isn't really going to care about that. Most likely, they'll still just lump them all in and together and use this as an excuse to further the narrative that the Eldians as a whole are a threat to be taken care of. And once again, Attack on Titan is tragically true to life, just as it was when it came to Reiner's parentage and the dynamic there. A big reason Gabby's situation here was so compelling is that I've seen this exact sort of BS play out in real life, so I know her general concerns in that regard are 1,000% justified. Of course, what this kid doesn't understand is that the plan of gaining freedom by being Marley's loyal servants wasn't going to work out either. The future she thinks that Eren ruined was really only a mirage, but she doesn't get that yet. But with what she does understand, you start to get how much pain she's actually in, and why she was so desperate to try and do something, anything, to maybe salvage the situation. Heck, looking at what she says to Falco towards the end of that scene, it seems like she's actually put aside her goal and dream of becoming the Armored Titan, and is instead making a last-ditch effort to keep the reputation and future of the Marleyan Eldians from being completely lost. It sounds like she fully expected to die in her efforts. Setting aside the circumstances and the larger picture that we as the audience are aware of, I do find her apparent intentions there pretty admirable and selfless. Not that it was purely altruistic, of course, but I already covered the revenge part of this, and now I'm talking about that larger issue regarding what was at stake for the Eldians in Marley and other parts of the world, from Gabby's perspective. I'll end this section by talking about Falco right quick. It was so great to me how they had the flashbacks, and you actually saw Falco fulfilling his special role and having borne witness to the conversation that had taken place between Eren and Reiner. I was so overjoyed when he actually shared that information with Gabby rather than just keeping it to himself like he could have. That's a particular peeve of mine in shows. How characters will have vitally important information that perhaps could have made a great deal of difference, but they just keep it to themselves while everything goes to rot. There was something really moving about the whole thing for me, and it highlighted that it actually mattered to have Falco in that prior scene and have him witness that incredible exchange. And dude, Falco just keeps giving us more reasons to like him. Meanwhile, you have Gabby blowing him off and going, "Hey, I didn't see all that bad stuff happen myself." I get that under the circumstances, it would have also been reckless to immediately accept Eren's accusations as gospel. But I do think she's manifesting some of the hard-headedness and hard-heartedness she has, and a bit of what I meant regarding her empathy issues relative to Eren's. Eren has his own issues in that department, but I think he's probably better than her in the specific area of that we saw here. Alright, so now that I've addressed all of that, I can finally talk about Sasha's death itself. I have really mixed feelings about that whole thing, to be honest. On the one hand, it was certainly a bold and surprising choice to kill off a major character so soon after we were united with her and the rest of Squad Levi finally. And it definitely adds like a really heavy additional negative impact regarding Eren's actions and also potentially regarding how the rest of his comrades view him, especially, that core friend group. But on the other hand, Sasha's death definitely robs us of development chances when it comes to her as a character, and I feel that Sasha could have really used that. Both she and Connie were largely relegated to comic relief roles, so I'd be excited when we finally had moments that showed her in a more serious and substantive light, like the whole magnificent sequence where she was returned to her old village and saved the young girl who was left alone. It's funny, there was a video I saw of that sequence, and the comments below were talking about how there had originally been plans for Sasha to die, but a staff member had been distraught over the idea and had convinced Isayama to spare Sasha. So she's actually survived in the series a good bit longer than was initially planned, apparently. The comments were so grateful about all of that, and of course I'm sitting there with the full body wince going on because I already knew at that point about Sasha's future in that regard. But another awesome moment we had even earlier on was that moment in Trust where she rescued a fellow cadet, Samuel, and kept him from becoming the first team casualty. That little moment was fantastic on several levels. It showed her reflexes, her movement skills, and her ability to improvise. It also highlighted the surprising quality of being able to make difficult choices. Spearing him through the leg like that was a pretty rough move, but was also what was necessary in the moment to save his life. And it's not necessarily something you expect from the goofy character who's mainly used for humor and is played as being kind of dumb and empty-headed. It was also a really important moment to me because it showed why Sasha really belonged as part of the team, and how she, like Connie, had actually made it into the top 10 somehow. Without moments like that, it just feels like she's been placed there to provide humor for the show, but realistically has no business being a part of this crew the way she is. And we did get more of that in Liberia, seeing her skills as the team sniper, this time with firearms rather than a bow and arrow. Our girl delivered, that's for darn sure. But I would have liked to have further development of her character, especially in terms of seeing what she's like as an adult. And a whole lot has happened for our party's characters since we last saw them in the final parts of Season 3. And of course, besides the question of her death itself, there's also the matter of how it was handled. The more I think about that, the worse it gets. The whole pacing of it was quicker in the anime than I thought from reading the manga, but that in particular I'm not really complaining about, I guess, especially since people can definitely succumb to injuries pretty rapidly in real life. It varies, and blood loss can definitely cause unconsciousness and death rapidly. But in speaking with a friend, she was definitely upset about the fact that Sasha had to die in foreign airspace rather than back home on Paradise. That didn't really bother me, since the important thing for me was that she was surrounded by her best friends. It would have been really different if she had died alone, or mostly alone, or even just with other soldiers, but not her close friends from Squad Levi. So I was pretty content with that. What I wasn't content with? The meat line. Speaking to another author about this, he expressed hope that the anime would fix the whole thing, but I definitely wasn't counting on that, because for better or worse, the meat line was what fans were expecting. And even if it should have been changed, I don't really expect MAPPA to do something that bold, especially with the way fans have already been behaving towards them, and how antsy fans already were before the season even began. If they had changed it, I'm sure folks would have been fussing at them and complaining that they had botched up such a simple and iconic moment. You had one job! But yeah, I agree that it would have been nice if they had fixed that, though I don't fault them for being cautious and leaving it unchanged. But I do fault its presence in the manga to begin with. Look, I get that it's a running gag with Sasha, and if anyone had that as their last words, I guess it would be her. That's Sasha for you, right? But I really feel that it robs the scene, and arguably the character herself, of some of the weight that should have been present. It's this tragic scene, and here I am being sad and tearing up, but then you have this frame of Connie standing there with tears streaming down his face, but his line is, she said, meat. The line and the visuals are so freaking discordant, and the line is so discordant with the tone of the overall sequence. I was emotional during that section of the episode, but then Connie shows up, and here I am stifling laughter myself while all this tragedy is playing out, and that may have been an even worse feeling in a way. That fellow author was right. Isayama didn't just turn Sasha's death into a joke. He turned it into a friggin' meme. Maybe he felt it was in character for Sasha, and maybe he also felt it needed to be there in order to have Eren laugh and the team misunderstand why. But I think Eren would have still had enough motive to laugh without that. And regarding characterization, Sasha could have said something about the island, about her village, her father, her friends. Instead, it feels like it's borderline being implied that food is more important to her than anything like that. And that impression really feels like a disservice to her as a character. Again, delirious people say odd stuff, I get it, but I don't think you can fully escape the shadow that dialogue choice ended up casting over the scene. Alright guys, thanks for listening to today, and I hope you had a great time. If you're enjoying the podcast, please don't forget to subscribe and turn your notifications on so you can get updates. And you can help make the podcast more visible for new viewers and listeners by leaving a like, share, comment, or review on whichever platform you use to listen. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, social media, etc. Be blessed and stay salty. Hello, listeners, and welcome to Dash of Salt with AJ. I'm your host, Ahsoka Jackson, author, podcaster, poet, and freelance proofreader. Okay, so I want to get to that thing I referenced earlier regarding Hanji Zoe and what she said to Eren, but first I have some quick comments about several other characters here, so let's see if I can run through them right quick. First of all, Mikasa. Sapphire made a really great catch here. I had noticed how Mikasa showed more emotion than we're used to from her when Sasha died, and Armin and Mikasa were both shown weeping over her. But what Sapphire made note of is the fact that it's like Eren has become more like the old Mikasa, and Mikasa has become more like the old Eren. Mikasa is now more openly emotional and vulnerable. And I mean beyond just anger or worry over Eren. And Eren has developed a calmer, colder, more restrained outward persona. It's much like the point another fan made about how Eren now resembles Annie in several senses. And the sort of reversal we see with Eren and Mikasa in episode 8 was definitely a really perceptive catch on Sapphire's part. Due credit there. She also made the further point that it's like Eren is becoming, or has become, a collection of some of his friends' best traits. Except it's like he has bootleg versions of those traits. I cracked up when she said that. I guess he couldn't afford the premium prices, so he went for the knockoffs. And I was like, come to think of it, I guess that explains the strategic stuff. That's his version of Armin's skills. Though, to be fair, I think Eren actually manages to exceed his friend's traits in certain regards. Though there are arguably huge downsides to that, which we'll see later. Sometimes a kid has too much of a good thing, and that ends up being the flaw, and why those traits better belong with their original owners. To anyone who ever thought Mikasa had issues, you ain't seen nothing yet. They do say you become like the people you hang out with the most, come to think of it, so I guess even that may be something of a natural evolution, as with what I said before regarding Levi and how Eren bears an increasing resemblance to him. Anyways, as far as the reaction Eren himself had to Sasha's death, it was really interesting to see how they played that in the anime. The delivery was more subtle than it had come off for me in the manga, and they also tweaked the timing of the visuals, I suspect to help clarify what was really going on there. Currently, I'm of the opinion that there are 2, maybe 3 reasons for his laugh here, though the third is a manga reason, so I think all I can say is, this feels familiar. Hopefully that's enough for manga readers to get what I mean. If not, you can always ask about it in the comments, just remember the spoiler thing, please. But the reasons I can say directly. A. I do think it was partly a genuine and fond laugh on his part. The way they handled it in the anime helps make that clearer. He was thinking back to lighthearted memories he had of Sasha, and how food and meat were a running theme with her. Although I think in a way, what he remembered probably twisted the knife further, because in that memory atop the wall, what she said was about more than just food. It was about the hope and even expectation, the determination she had, for the idea that they'd one day reclaim their homeland and have enough farming territory to end the food shortages. And even though they've now cleared out the mindless Titans, the war for their home is still far from over, and Sasha has died without witnessing the end to that battle. In any case, while I think the laugh was partially one of warmth and fond remembrance, I also figured there was a much darker side to it as well. Point B. How often do we ever see Eren laugh, guys? And the main memory of laughter that stands out for me is probably the same one you're thinking of. That one scene with himself and Mikasa, which is no doubt one of the most iconic and powerful moments of the series. In that scene, Eren is finally collapsing under the strain of everything, and we hear this crazed, bitter laughter that dissolves into wailing. And the deeply painful, tragic theme we see expressed in that scene is the cycle that Eren has found himself trapped within. No matter how hard he strives, and no matter how much power and skill he gains, he cannot save the lives of his comrades in general, or the lives of the people he loves and cares for the most. He fails to save his mother. He's not strong enough, as Mr. Hannes bluntly notes. So years pass, and Eren gains more knowledge, more skill, more experience, more power. But Mr. Hannes dies, and Eren can't stop that either. And to make matters worse, the Titan that kills him is the same one that ate Eren's mother. So years pass again, and Eren again gains more knowledge, more skill, more experience, more power, and Sasha dies. So nearly half a decade after Hannes' death, And nearly a full decade after Carla Yeager's death, Eren is in the same place as always. It still was not good enough. Nothing he did and nothing he gained was enough when and where it mattered the most. And this time it actually is his fault more than ever, because of how his actions and choices drove the situation. And I strongly believe that the sort of guilt, largely excessive guilt, that has haunted him since Carla's death is a huge part of what drives Eren, and also what is, to be blunt, destroying him mentally and spiritually. And we're going to see more of that manifesting over time as he continues moving forward. So I think that laugh was partially a very bitter laugh at himself and the situation and the maddening futility of it all. How he's fought so hard and striven through so many years, only to find himself in the same place he always seems to end up, like his whole life is just a cruel joke or experiment. And in a way, that's like a microcosm of the larger situation in his world. We've heard about the old Eldian Empire, and if what was said is accurate, they were freaking monstrous. And now we have Marley on the scene, and Marley has definitely become the new monster. And we had Willie Tybur deliver this whole history that apparently no one learned anything from, including himself, because his end solution was freaking horrific and shows zero enlightenment. And now, did you catch what Floke said? The red-headed dude that wanted to throw Gabby and Falco off the airship after beating the daylights out of them? Yeah, he's the same dude who dragged Eren off the battlefield and wanted to punish him with life. That guy. Now he's saying some mess about a new Eldian Empire. I'm sorry, hold the fudge up. I want Paradise to have its independence, and there also needs to be freedom for the Eldians in other parts of the globe. But if he's talking about trying to repeat that same pinky in the brain world domination shtick that Marley and possibly old Eldia already tried, he can 1000% miss me with that insanity. Is he trying to keep the world in an endless cycle of horror and punishment worthy of a Greek legend? Because that's the direction he's aiming at, whether he comprehends it or not. In any case, I guess mentioning Floke is a good segue for a quick roundup of other characters' moments here. A. We have Peek doing her job once again as the unofficial analyst for Team Marley. For now, it at least seems like she is still loyal to their side, especially if she was telling the truth about having kept an eye on Zeke and Zeke's acolytes, like Yelena, the 7-foot blonde chick. Now, speaking of Zeke, I remembered that he was secretly working with Eren, and that this was why he behaved oddly on the battlefield, basically ignoring Eren and not doing much attacking in general. But I'd definitely forgotten that the rest of the team from Paradise was also in on this and knew that Zeke was cooperating. So that actually caught me by surprise, even though I'd seen some of the manga for this section already. And of course, talking about Zeke leads us to Levi, who had some great moments in this episode, for sure. I'll comment on that next time, along with some quick notes regarding Reiner and Jean. And I think I can finally talk about Zoe to finish off my commentary for this episode. Alright guys, thanks for listening to today, and I hope you've had a great time. If you're enjoying the podcast, please don't forget to subscribe and turn notifications on so you can get updates. It can help make the podcast more visible for new viewers and listeners by leaving a like, share, comment, or review on whichever platform you use to listen. YouTube, Spotify, Breaker, Overcast, Pocket Cast, Radio Public, social media, etc. And as of recently, the podcast is on a newer site as well, Verbal. I have an extra link for that. Now, be blessed and stay salty. Hello listeners, and welcome to A Dash of Salt with AJ. I'm your host, Ahsoka Jackson, author, podcaster, poet, and freelance proofreader. I left off last time having finally come to Levi. Before I actually get to him though, gotta take a quick sec for my guys Reiner and Jean. First of all, I am really impressed by Jean. His stability and his ability to keep a cool head, those are such crucial qualities to have, especially with being on a team with more hot-headed and impulsive types. His focus is on ending the conflict, which is exactly what the end goal should be. And he clearly wants to prevent further bloodshed, to the extent possible. What's more, he was actually able to keep his calm and think in terms of long-term strategy, even when under the severe strain of watching a dear friend bleed out. The combo of foresight, mental clarity, and restraint he showed there was freaking impressive. And you definitely see that Jean is someone who is very much worthy of having a command position. And he was actually able to rapidly react when Gabby shot Sasha. Pretty sure the shot would have killed Gabby if Falco hadn't saved her. Yet also back off and not just go for blind vengeance once he saw the children were safely restrained. Plus, we already had him demonstrating his battle skills earlier in the fight. There's a reason our boy made it into the top 10 back in training days. And honestly, I think Jean would also be one of the best possible folks to have in a top governmental position in Paradis as well. Although I'm still sad Marco can't be here to serve as his right-hand man. Marco's another great guy to have around when everyone else is losing their shiznit. Speaking of folks losing their shiznit, gotta talk about Reiner. Okay, jokes aside, what he managed there was actually pretty smooth. He was able to retrieve Galliard in time, which was the crucial thing, and he even surprised Eren in being able to do so. That misdirection and how he got Eren to focus on dodging and miss what the actual goal was, that was slick. And even though Reiner was out of commission for most of the overall battle in Liberia, he'd saved both Falco and Galliard when he was active. That said, it was still neat how fortunes were reversed. In previous seasons, we saw that Reiner was powerful enough to more or less send Eren flying with a punch. Though I should mention that the fight breakdown I've posted here before noted that it probably wasn't purely a matter of Reiner's force. Eren likely moved with the blow voluntarily in order to avoid taking its full impact and the accompanying damage. But in any case, now we have Eren able to send Reiner across the darned plaza with a single punch. That moment was satisfying as heck when I first saw it in the manga. And ironically enough, I still feel like the manga version has more a sense of impact for me. And technically, the anime version does a better job in some ways of conveying just how far Reiner was sent flying, because there's a pretty good gap of time between the moment he goes flying and the moment you hear him hit the spot he eventually ends up. But I think the moment as a whole took place so quickly that it's hard to appreciate details like that. Though I definitely enjoyed it when I was watching the sequence for a direct comparison with the manga. And one thing I can say for sure is that the art and animation in that sequence looked freaking gorgeous. It was beautiful. I feel like they did things a little differently in that sequence than they did in some other spots. And while I haven't minded the animation differences to the extent other folks have, that really caught my eye, in a great way. And there's a sequence later on in the season that I'm insanely excited for, and I'm literally hoping to God that they'll use this level of animation or better for that sequence, because it really warrants as much. Seriously, when it's time for the cuffs to come off, and we hear that battle cry, those are my two references for the manga readers. When the things in that sequence happen, I dearly, dearly hope the animation looks this beautiful. Because that whole sequence should be freaking magnificent, and it has to get that sort of execution. Please do not let me down, Mappa, because that would hurt a little bit, not gonna lie. Probably more than a little bit, actually. Oh, speaking of the art, I really like that spiked design for the Armored Titan. That was in the manga as well, and it looks really neat. And it looks less heavily armored overall than some of the other variations, so I guess that's meant to be one of the faster, more offense-oriented versions. Oh, I nearly forgot to talk about this, but from very early on, I didn't really buy Eren's explanation about why he couldn't continue fighting with Reiner. I get that he does have limits and had already been fighting a good while, plus this was his third consecutive transformation. But I really think Eren just didn't want to kill Reiner at this point, and that was the main reason he didn't pursue the fight further. And saying that he was out of strength was a way he could spare Reiner without being too obvious about it in front of the rest of the team. You know, there was something genuinely sorrowful and melancholy in how Eren looked at Reiner just before departing. Maybe regretful is the best way to describe that look. And now getting to hear the delivery of the line in the anime just reinforces all of this for me. I don't think that was a sarcastic tone I heard from him. Both his expression and delivery were like he was speaking to someone he genuinely considered a friend on some level. Given all that was said and established in his conversation and confrontation with Reiner, maybe the reason Eren is so affected is that he truly feels Reiner understands him better than just about anyone else at this point, and he regrets the fact that they're positioned as enemies to each other still. Okay, so Levi now. First of all, great lines in that exchange with Zeke. And what a sight it is for those two, of all people, to be working together. It seems even less likely than seeing Eren, usually our vengeful firebrand, collaborating with Zeke, which is saying something. And honestly, Levi's line about saving the best part for last is a pretty believable explanation as far as how he's managing to keep his cool here. It's like he's still gonna kill Zeke, just not yet. He's gotta wait for the right moment so he can savor it properly. I feel you, Levi. We've both been waiting for revenge on that hairy son of a gun. Another thing I was waiting for was the reunion with a certain AWOL subordinate. Honestly, I'd been a wee bit terrified when I first started understanding the circumstances of Eren's departure, but Levi's reaction was actually milder than I had feared, so I was relieved when I read that part. And while I'm not fond of Levi's pattern of behavior when it comes to how he treats his subordinates, in this one case, he pretty much gets a pass for me. In fact, having read some of the manga, I now have a question. Should Levi have actually hit him harder in this scene? Or did Eren finally get kicked in the head one time too many? I mean that in a couple of sentences. You guys will get it later. But you know I love Eren, so I have my reasons for asking something like that. But boy, this is a whole running theme, isn't it? Eren bound and in custody, getting kicked upside the head by Levi, and Armin having to restrain Mikasa from interfering. Although at least this time the beating was far less severe, and Levi did it before Eren was actually restrained. Although, just like before, Eren didn't actually resist as he might have. But before I move on to Eren's other delightful superior in the military, I want to note that I'm really glad they didn't cut that moment where Levi is commenting on Eren's eyes and expression. That was such an intriguing moment when I first read it, and while they didn't elaborate on it in the anime like I was hoping, I'm glad that they at least kept it. I guess it was really meant to stay as just a quick little hint at a larger dynamic going on. I think I more or less understand what it was that Levi was picking up on here. Without getting into it, I can note what I have before. The spark that we used to see in Eren's eyes before is gone, and there's a certain deadness to them now. But speaking of Eren's dead eyes, he made very good use of them when he turned them upon Hange Zoe in her reaction to her BS. Dear Lord, I'm gonna have to do a 6th episode just for this, aren't I? Well, alrighty then. Alright guys, thanks for listening to me today, and I hope you've had a great time. If you're enjoying the podcast, please don't forget to subscribe and turn your notifications on so you can get updates. And you can help make the podcast more visible for new viewers and listeners by leaving a like, share, comment, or review on whichever platform you use to listen. YouTube, Spotify, Breaker, Overcast, Pocket Cast, Radio Public, social media, etc. And as of recently, the podcast is on a newer site as well, Verbal. I'll have an extra link for that. Now, be blessed and stay salty. Hello listeners, and welcome to A Dash of Salt with AJ. I'm your host, Ahsoka Jackson, author, podcaster, poet, and freelance proofreader. Here's what I've been trying to get to for a few episodes now. As I said before, maybe I'm just overanalyzing this, but the more I look at it, the more I feel that Hange was trying to manipulate and guilt-trip Eren on a personal level about all this, and the angle she was using for that was freaking absurd. She frames this whole thing as though they were all there to save Eren out of the kindness of their collective hearts, and he was taking advantage of their noble natures or personal affection for him. Freaking bite me, woman. Sure, that's at least partially true for Eren's actual friends from the squad, and I'd say that even Hange and Levi do care about him personally to some extent. But the regiment, the military as a whole, and even Hange and Levi as his superiors, their primary interest in Eren is strategic, not humanitarian. For her to even act like it's the latter is both outrageous and freaking hilarious. Except I'm not laughing right now. They were not there to rescue Eren Yeager. They were there to retrieve the Attack Titan and Foundling Titan. Eren is currently their best weapon and their ace in the hole. And he would also spell doom for parties if Marley were able to kill him and take the powers, especially that of the Foundling Titan. They were there to get back their most important weapon. But if Eren were just Eren Yeager, the bright-eyed little ball of rage from Shiganshina, he would have been literally left to rot ages ago. That's how it is in the Survey Corps. It's not that no one cares, but the expectation is that soldiers can and will be called upon to sacrifice themselves or be sacrificed at a moment's notice. And the Scout Regiment has massive casualty rates and employs super costly strategies. Heck, even if they did have some personal stake when it came to Eren, guess what? Look, Levi definitely cares about his subordinates and teammates, but that didn't save Eld, Gunther, Olo, or Petra, did it? Where are they now? Heck, where's Erwin, his best friend and respected commander? And I seem to recall Hanja telling a heartbroken Mikasa to give up and allow Armin to die because she felt it would be better strategically if Erwin were revived instead. I actually appreciate that Hanja comforted her some, but the message there was quite clear, and Eren witnessed that conversation himself. In fact, speaking of Erwin brings up something I didn't even consider until I was writing and thinking about this for the podcast episode. Now I'm like, no wonder Eren was sitting there looking so thoroughly unimpressed. Now, let's be clear here. Eren is not someone who takes the deaths of his comrades lightly, especially when it happens in the process of helping him or protecting him. Quite the contrary. We've seen throughout the series that he's guilt-stricken to an excessive degree, if anything. And this man who's now so deeply feeling the pain of even his enemies certainly hasn't become stone-hearted when it comes to his actual friends and comrades, even if it looks that way from the outside. But Eren's keeping his cards really close to his chest right now, and there's a ton on his mind. Plus there are some other factors here I can't get into yet. But he has good reason for his apparent lack of reaction. Although heck, we see that stony mask crack to a significant degree at the end of the episode, when he hears of Sasha's death, and then Jean points out Eren's responsibility in that matter. I forgot to mention this last episode, but that expression we see on Eren's face finally, that mixture of horror, anguish, and frantic desperation, is also reminiscent of when he finally broke down in Season 2 after Hannes died. Hello, madness, my old friend. So Eren is definitely deeply affected by this in reality. And I would say that's like the most intense emotion we've seen from him this season. But that said, I'm realizing that some of his reaction towards Zoe probably was showing how he felt and exactly how unimpressed he was by her routine here. I'm definitely not here to try and absolve Eren of his responsibility in all of this, even though I primarily blame Marley for this whole situation and the resulting deaths, as I explained already when it came to the deaths of Marleyan individuals. However, based on what was said, it sounds like the casualty level for parties here was relatively low in terms of raw numbers, though of course Sasha's death had an extra impact. Now that's partly a testament to how skilled the troops themselves were, but it's also a testament as well to the plan conceived by Eren, Armin, and apparently Zeke as well. And here's the clincher here. I've been thinking about just the general issue of casualties in a scout regiment and how willing they've been to sacrifice their soldiers' lives. But what I realized later was that Hanja Zoe specifically served under Erwin Smith, of all people. And she was busy fighting for him to be revived, as she felt he was the better option when the choice had to be made between Erwin and Armin. The scout regiment under Erwin Smith's leadership was getting freaking cold like a candy bowl on Halloween. And this is not to take away from Erwin's accomplishments. In fact, it sounds like he may have actually been able to improve the scouts' survival rates in general, versus how things had been under his predecessors. But his strategies were still enormously risky and costly, and the death rates were extremely high. And of course, by the very end, nearly the entire scout regiment had been wiped out. Now, Eren is facing a different set of circumstances here, and I don't know how successful present-day Eren would have been facing what Erwin was up against, just I'm not sure if Erwin would have done better or worse in dealing with Liberia, so it's hard to make a one-to-one comparison. However, with all the slaughter that took place under Erwin's leadership that Hanja supported and actually requested additional risks of, for her to now trying to be guilting Eren about what seems to have been a military action that cost far less than average for parties in the Survey Corps, and to have succeeded in inflicting far more damage than average on their adversaries, for her to be trying to guilt him over that is freaking rich. And as though the Eren thing itself wasn't enough, there's also what I pointed out when Hanji was busy chiding Armin. She's trying to be Miss Responsible Adults in the Group nowadays. Yet she's the one who is busy chasing after Titans like a rabid animal, and had to be restrained in various senses by her comrades and superiors. It's not that she's not allowed to turn a new page here, and as I stated before, I think the calmer personality is actually what she was originally like before warping her plain hatred of Titans into this frantic and somewhat sadistic curiosity and obsession with them. But show a little goddarn self-awareness, woman, and definitely don't try to play Eren here as though he hasn't witnessed in intimate detail the realities of how you and the rest of the Survey Corps operate. Again, there is a personal element when it comes to his actual friends from the 104th, and even Hanji and Levi to some extent. For the most part, what Eren made use of was not some personal emotional bonds, or some nobility and compassion on the part of the military. He knows where he stands with them in reality, and what he did was leverage his position as a valued weapon and tool, one they couldn't let fall into enemy hands, and he used that to coerce them into cooperating with his plan. I get being mad at him. I'd be seriously ticked at him too, even though I largely support the Liberial strike in its own right. But I'm not interested in having Hanji try to misrepresent the situation like the folks of the Survey Corps or government as a whole are busy sacrificing themselves out of their beautiful, altruistic feelings of brotherly love for Eren Yeager. She reminds me of a phrase from Dave Ramsey that I love. A lot of times when he employs it, it's in the context of someone who's dealing with manipulative family members. Dave will say that said relative or other individual is a travel agent for guilt trips. That feels rather applicable here. Also, while Eren can definitely take the blame for this particular situation, I'd say that the prior situations where he was kidnapped and had to be retrieved weren't really his fault, so trying to pile on guilt about those is just freaking low. Especially since he was also very much willing to sacrifice himself for the greater good. In fact, there were times when he was specifically ordered not to fight and help out, even though he was perfectly willing to. Plus, the government was kind enough to add its own death penalty threat if he failed to deliver or if he was deemed to have stepped out of line. And I think he took all of that better than could reasonably even be expected. If the folks of the Survey Corps are fed up with Eren, guess what? He should have been fed up with them. Actually, this goes to a point I've made before. Despite what you'd assume from his personality, Eren has in fact been quite the trooper as a soldier for Paradis. So if he's actually started going rogue at this point, that would not be a decision he came to lightly or without substantial provocation/motivation. Alright guys, thanks for listening to today, and I hope you've had a great time. If you're enjoying the podcast, please don't forget to subscribe and turn your notifications on so you can get updates. You can help make the podcast more visible for new viewers and listeners by leaving a like, share, comment, or review on whichever platform you use to listen. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, social media, etc. Be blessed and stay salty.